past two that they're out there at the Connection Center, or get on your phone and to our app, or get on our website, because those are foundational for what you're going to hear today. I'll try to bring you up to date just a little bit, but they're really foundational, so I hope that you'll do that. Before we get into it, I just want to make you aware that if you weren't here last week, then you missed something, and we want to give you a chance to participate in this. In your programs, there's a card that just says guest services. And the reason that is in there is because guest services is one of those areas within our church where you make such a difference, but you also can get to meet a lot of new people. And it's just a great thing. You talk to our team members on guest services, and they are doing a fantastic job. They love the other people they work with because it's a team, and also they're having an impact on people who come in here, because the guest cards, the survey cards that I ask people to send back to me after the first time, consistently say, man, it was friendly. You could feel the energy from the time I came in the door. People just made me feel welcome, and that's a big part of what they do. They do a lot of other stuff behind the scenes as well. But if you'd like to be in a place where you can connect with some other people, and it's not every week, but just a way that you can contribute, because we say at Dayspring, we are not consumers, we're contributors. We're all part of this. Would love to have you do that. And all you need to do is just put your name, phone number, and your email address, and put that then in the bag when the bag goes by at the end for our offering, and someone will be in touch with you, okay? This doesn't lock you in. It's just that someone will be in touch to tell you about what those opportunities are. So, in this series, we've been asking one question, and I told you right at the beginning we're going to do it every week. And so if you're new today, oh, by the way, if you're brand new, come out to the Connection Center afterwards, because I would love to meet you if it's your first time here. But, if you haven't, if maybe you're not brand new, but you haven't been here these last couple weeks anyway, you may not get this at first. But those of us that have been here, we get it. And so, guys, we're going to say this, and I want the attitude in it right at the first time, okay? You ready? Let's put it up there. Am I taking responsibility for my life? Yeah, that was not bad, okay? You had the attitude. Let's do it one more time. Am I taking responsibility for my life? Really? And we're doing the really because we all want to think we're responsible. We all want to say, yeah, I'm a responsible person. You look in the mirror and you say, yeah, I'm a responsible person. So we're asking this, really? So that we actually do ask it. And I hope you'll be asking it every week. Now, just to give you kind of overview of where we've been at. We started out a couple weeks ago by looking at the story of Adam and Eve in the Old Testament, and we found out there that God created us to be responsible. You are created to be responsible. Just like Adam and Eve were created, they had not a lot of rules and stuff. They just had one rule, don't eat from that tree, but a lot of responsibility, and that's what God does with us. He has given us that inner desire. It's this imprint on our life. We want to be responsible. That's why you're happiest when you're responsible. When you've got something and you're doing it well, and maybe you get an attaboy or attagirl, maybe you're a good mom, and someone comes up and says, wow, you're a great mom. Oh, that fills your tank up because you're taking responsibility, and it feels good when you do that. Now, if you don't do it and you don't take the responsibility, then you don't feel so good because you were created to do that. We also said responsible people don't need a lot of rules and regulations. They don't need a lot of rules and regulations. The rules that are out there a lot of times in homes, maybe in places where you work, or even in our nation, all the rules and regulations, so many of them are out there to control the behavior of irresponsible people. Responsible people don't need a lot of rules and stuff like this. And I'm thinking, I was going to talk with you later, who's a judge, thinking you probably want to maybe use some of this as you talk to your people there in court about being responsible for their lives, because a lot of the rules and things that people got to follow, it's all because there are a lot of irresponsible people around in our culture. We also said this, that your irresponsibility, it's not just you, it affects other people. And if we're irresponsible long enough, someone else has to come and clean up our mess. And when that happens, when we're blaming somebody else, or especially that person has to clean up our mess, what does that do to relationships? It doesn't really make relationships real good when we're pulling that off, when we have to clean up somebody else's mess. In fact, some of you are here today, and you're saying, yeah, I'm busy right now. I'm cleaning up somebody's mess, my kid's mess, or my husband, whatever, I've been doing that. And we said that this is a principle that kind of oversees the whole thing. This was last week, that you reap what you sow. in life. You didn't know maybe that was in the Bible. Yeah, you reap what you sow. And you reap it always later. You don't get instant results. Later and in a greater amount, just like a farmer that's planting seeds. And so if you sow good or bad, you're going to reap that same kind of stuff later on and in even a greater amount. So if you weren't here these weeks, please get those recordings. But here, let me give you today what the bottom line is. There's one thing I want you to get out of today. This is it. That there is a time to pray and there's a time to take responsibility. There's a time to pray about things, and prayer is good, don't get me wrong. But there's also a time to take responsibility. In fact, there's a time to stop praying and take responsibility. And we're going to go to the Old Testament today, way back, and we're going to look at the story of a guy named Joshua, who was the second great leader of the nation of Israel. And I'll tell you more about that story in a second. But what I want to tell you is right now is this is going to address three different groups of people, and I suspect that most of us are in one of these groups. First, it's going to address those Christians or those religious people that are here today who you tend to hide behind your prayers. You pray, but you pray because you're praying about something you should be taking responsibility for, and you're not. And so you just blow smoke, and instead you pray. In fact, for some, you've known people like that. You know people in some church. You know some person at work, they're a religious person, they try to be a good person, and they're saying all this religious stuff, and they sound real spiritual. But you look at their life and you say, really? You are so annoying. Why don't you take responsibility for a change? I don't see you doing anything. Most irresponsible people I know, maybe, you know? A second group it's going to speak to is this. Those of us who have what I want to call misguided compassion. You're compassionate people. That's a good thing to be. But misguided compassion. That's when there's someone in your life who's not taking responsibility. And what a person with misguided compassion does is they start to feel sorry for that person. I just feel so badly for them. And we start to make up reasons why it's okay that they're not taking responsibility. These parents they had were horrible parents. Or the events that they've gone through in life, it's been so hard. Not denying that. But at some point, people, every one of us, no matter what your background has been, we have to get to the point where we say, it's me, it's me, it's me. But there are some of us that we don't ever call people on that, and so we enable that. There are some of us here today, if I can be so bold as to say, you're enabling your spouse, or you're enabling your kids, because you don't call them on certain things in this area. Finally, we're going to talk to those people that you feel like you're reaping what someone else has sown. That you're reaping, and it's not good what someone else has sown. Maybe you're reaping what your partner has sown, or what your child has sown, or what your parents sowed a lot earlier in your life, or what your boss has sown. You're reaping that. So that group, if you're here, I think most of us are in one of those groups. This message is going to be really powerful for us. Now, we're going to go back to Joshua chapter 7. You can read before that and after it. Please go home and do that to make sure that I'm telling you the truth about this story, because I'm going to read a part, but the rest I'm just going to tell you about because I don't have time to read the entire thing. I would never on purpose tell you something wrong or misinformative, but just hold me accountable on that, okay? So you can go home and read it. But as we talk about this story of Joshua, who they come to the edge of the promised land, they cross the Jordan River, and now he's leading them into Canaan, another name for the promised land. And they've got these instructions from God. And basically God told them this: I want you to run off everybody that's there. All the people, the cultures that are there, I want you to run them off, and if they're not gone, they need to be destroyed. And I don't know if that bothers you, but I got to be honest, that bothers me a little bit, because we want to ask, good grief, isn't God a God of love? Is this the same God in the New Testament that we're talking about here in the Old Testament? And it's okay to have those kind of questions. You don't have to pretend like you've got all the answers here at Dayspring. But I hope I'll give you just a little bit of an answer to that question, because I think I've got to address this because it's in our minds. Most of us know, maybe even just from Sunday school, that the Israelite nation, they spent 400 years in Egypt, and a large part of that time they were slaves. They went to Egypt when there was about 100 of them, and then during those 400 years, they grew to, our best estimates are about 3.5 million people. They grew so fast and so strong that the Egyptians said, we're going to make slaves out of them because they were afraid of them. So they spent some horrible years being slaves. Moses comes, and Charlton Heston, the whole thing, he comes and he takes them out of the if you see the old movie, takes them out of the promised land, leads them out, there's miracles and everything else. And then when they get to the edge of the promised land, they're wandering around for 40 years, but finally they get their act together and they get to the Jordan River. Moses dies, and then Joshua, kind of the second in charge, he takes over. And they cross the Jordan River, and he takes over in this thing and leads them into the promised land. And this is now where he has been told, wipe the slate clean. The people got to go. One way or another, they've got to go. To help understand that, rewind with me. I hope this isn't complicated. Rewind 650 years. This was when Abraham, some of you remember that name, Abraham, he was actually in the promised land. He was in Canaan. Now, that's not where he was from. He was from another place in Mesopotamia, but God said to him, Abraham, I want you to go to this place I'm going to show you. So he leads Abraham, and he leads him and his small family at that point to the promised land. And when he gets him to the promised land, he makes this amazing promise. He said, Abraham, you are going to have a son. I mean, he's getting near 100 years old now. He's like, yeah, right, God. But you're going to have a son. You're going to have so many descendants, it's going to be like the stars in the sky. Your people are also going to be slaves in another country, that would be Egypt, for 400 years. But then they're going to come back here, and this is going to be their land. And this verse then, as God's talking to them, gives us some insight onto why God told them that when this land is yours, the people have got to go. Genesis 15:16, he's talking to Abraham, and he says, in the fourth generation, the 400 years, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. Now, didn't that last part just take that problem away for you? Let me explain to you. The Amorites was one of those cultures that lived in the land. There were many just like it. But God was saying, their culture is just nuts. Their culture is just pagan. It's extreme. And it was like the other cultures around at that time. Let me tell you what these cultures were like. They sacrificed little kids, whether they were babies, whether they were toddlers. They would take them on their altars to their gods, and they would sacrifice them to their gods. I mean, no concept of human dignity or anything like that. And you also see that, I'm just giving you some examples, in their treatment of women. It wasn't just that they were a patriarchal society. There are societies today still that are very highly patriarchal. And, that I'm not going to say that's a bad thing, good thing. But what they did back then is the way that women were treated. Some of you think that women are treated bad now. You should have been there back then. There are a couple instances in the Old Testament that I could read for you of what those cultures did and how they treated women, where it would just shock you. And because there are kids here, I am not going to read them because I cannot in good conscience just read that and let your kids get images in their mind of the way that they treated women back then. And there was a bunch of other stuff. And so, God wanted the Israelites to be different. They're moving into the promised land. But he wanted them to have a new view of the world, a new view of life, a new view of human dignity. And so he said, the sins of the Amorites have not reached their full measure yet. In other words, you know what? I'm going to be merciful. I'm going to give those cultures some time, 4 centuries actually, to get their act together. I'm going to give them a chance to turn it around. But if they don't, I have got to do something drastic here. I've got to put that culture, not a couple people, I've got to put that culture out of existence. I will exterminate that culture because that culture has come to the point where it is just totally irredeemable. Because he knew that the Israelites, if they moved in, that they would be tempted to intermarry, they'd be contaminated in their view of babies, of women. He knew that they would worship the gods of these other nations. And so God said, This has got to go. And so I don't know if that's intellectually or emotionally satisfying to you, but it does explain to me a little bit that this was one of the reasons that God He is a loving God, but there are some times when a culture gets to that place when it was just so far gone, God had to do something drastic. And so, with that in the background, fast forward now. They've just come across into the promised land. Joshua, they've gone to Jericho. You remember that town? Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. That song. The walls came down and the flood. No, that's a different song, I guess. Forget that. They went there, and what they did, God told them, okay, here's what I want you to march around the city for 7 days. Don't say a word, just very quiet. Once around the city. 7th day, 7 times around, and at the end, shout, for God has given you the city. So that's what they did. They did that 7th day, 7 times. They shouted, they blew the trumpets, and the walls of Jericho came down. And God had told them, when you defeat Jericho and you defeat these other cities in the promised land, here's the thing. Do not take anything for yourselves. You're going to find all kinds of spoils there. There's going to be gold. There's going to be silver. There's going to be beautiful clothes. And, it's that's the way it was in war. Finders, keepers, losers, weepers. That was the general thing back there. God said, no, I don't want you to do that at all. Everything that you find is devoted to God. In other words, treat it like it's already an offering to God. You can't touch it. It's like a burnt offering. And a lot of that stuff, literally, most of it was totally burned up. And I think maybe one of the reasons God did this is because, the gods that they worshiped, a lot of them were silver, gold. So the gold and silver they would have picked up would have been these idols. And so God didn't want to have any part of that. He's just basically saying, everything that you go into these cities, it's devoted to me. Learn to depend on me, not on what you're going to get through the spoils of war. So the walls fall, but it's hard for one guy. His name was Achan, and this is a story, maybe you've never even heard this name before. His name was Achan, though. He walks into Jericho. I don't know if he was there right after the walls fell or how it worked, but he walked in, and he uncovers some silver. He uncovers some gold. He uncovers some fine robes that would have been worth a lot of money. And the Israelites, they'd been running around the desert for 40 years. They didn't have anything like this. So he decides, he takes it. He disobeyed. He was irresponsible. He took it, and he went and hid it under the corner of his tent. So, now we pick up the scripture we're actually going to read. Joshua 7, verse 2. Now Joshua, this is after Jericho, he sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Bethaven to the east of Bethel. That's just geographic locations that people back then would have been familiar with. And he told them, go up and spy out the region. In other words, go out and check it out. And so the men went up and spied out Ai. When they returned to Joshua, they said, not all the people are going to have to go up against Ai. Jericho's a big city. This is just a little podunk town. Just send a few thousand people. They'll be fine, but don't send the entire army. It's going to be easy. So send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary all the people, for only a few men are there. So about 3,000 men went up. But, big but, they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. Imagine the shock. God had just done this miracle. The walls of Jericho had come down. They didn't do anything to make that happen at all. They disobeyed God. The walls fell down. God made it easy for them. So they learned to depend on him. And now they think they're going to have it easy, and they go to Ai, and the men of Ai turn around and are starting to kill them, killed 36 of their own. What a shocker. They chased the Israelites from the city gates as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At this, I bet this is true, the hearts of the people melted and became like water, like they were scared. It's like, what happened? Where's God? We just saw this miracle. God promised to be with us. What happened? We thought it was going to breeze. God, what's wrong with you? Where were you? Then Joshua, verse 6, tore his clothes and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord. That's the point of worship, the ark of the covenant, remaining there until evening. That's one of the things that the Jews did back then when they were just so sad. They were so So mourning, what had happened, they would literally take their robes and stuff and tear them as a sign of that. So that's what Joshua was doing here. And he laid on the ground. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. And there's still some cultures in the Middle East that do this today. If you see, they sprinkle dust on their heads, and that's, again, to just a way of extreme mourning, extreme sadness. They couldn't believe it. And Joshua said, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? God, why did you see this? Why did you do this? It's your fault. Why? We had faith, but now look what you've done. Now we know it wasn't God's responsibility. This was because of what Achan had done. But Joshua was blaming God. He didn't know what Achan had done yet. And he said, if only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. If only we had been content to not be worried about crossing the Jordan River and taking all this and that. We could have just lived on the other side, not had any of this mess and feeling like you weren't with us anymore, God. That we should have done that. And then he goes on, oh Lord, what can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites, that's the other cultures there, and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name? In other words, God, look at this. Look what happened. Look what you did. What are people going to think about you? We wanted to worship you as the great God. Now what are they going to think? That you're a wuss. That, you don't even exist, that you can't do anything. This is embarrassing. You're an embarrassment to us, God, and you're an embarrassment to yourself. So verse 10, and this is the main verse of this message. The Lord said to Joshua, stand up. What are you doing down on your face? See, he's down there kneeling this whole time. He's laying out before God. God, the Lord said, Joshua, stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Stop whining. Stand up. Why are you kneeling and praying right now? See, God was basically saying, look, Joshua, there's a time, this is not the time to kneel and pray. This is the time to do something. And there's some of us that God wants to say that today. Prayer's a good thing. But this may not be the time to pray. This is a time for us to take responsibility, get up, and do something. And he goes on, he says, verse 11. Now, I've underlined these places for you. Israel has sinned, the nation. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. Now, Joshua, again, doesn't know what Achan has done yet. But we do. We know the end of the story and everything. And we're like, God, time out. This wasn't they. This wasn't Israel, the nation. This was one man that did this. God continues. They have taken some of the devoted things. Those things that were devoted to me, that were to be sacrificed to me. The things that I told them, don't enrich yourselves by this stuff because I want you to trust in me. As an expression of your devotion to me, your dependence on me. Leave that stuff there. They didn't do that. He goes on, they have stolen, they have lied, they have put them with their own possessions. That is why, here's the answer now. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. Don't blame me. Something happened. This is why they turn their backs and run, because they have been made liable to destruction. In other words, God's saying, they did this, now their protection's gone. He says, I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. That stuff, it's got to be destroyed. And again, he's saying to him and saying to us, don't substitute prayer for taking responsibility. Stop praying, get up, do something. And so he continues, verse 13, go consecrate the people. In other words, tell them to get ready. This is something important coming up. Tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. That which is devoted is among you, O Israel. The things, in other words, that should have been left there, they didn't get left there. You, Israel, cannot stand against your enemies until you remove it. Now, some of you may be confused by all that. Here's what all this is talking about, and this is why it's so important. Responsibility and irresponsibility is a community thing. It's a community thing. It just doesn't affect one person. Responsibility and irresponsibility is a community thing. Achan knew what he was supposed to do. I mean, everybody knew this was what God said. And now the whole nation had been punished. The whole nation had reaped what Achan sowed. Not fair. I mean, does that seem fair to you? No, not fair. But it's the nature of community. It's the nature of relationships of human beings. If I'm connected to you, and I am as your pastor, what I sow, you will reap. That's why I take responsibility of being pastor here so strongly. Because I've seen churches blow up over some stupid stuff that pastors have done. But the opposite is true. Same thing. What you sow, I will reap. And the people that are connected to you in your family, they will reap. Because it's a community thing. It happens in a marriage, in a family, in an actual community, in a town, in a nation. And it's not fair. But it's the way it is. It's the way that life is. Someone here today, you're saying, well, you know what? That's me. I've got a totally irresponsible spouse. I got this totally irresponsible spouse, and I am trying to be the best husband. I am trying to be the best wife. But my spouse is irresponsible with time, with their money, with their morality, with their mouth, with the way they say things, with alcohol, with prescription drugs, whatever it might be. And you're saying, I'm reaping what that person is sowing. It's not fair. I mean, I'm trying to do all the right things. I'm trying to be the best husband, best wife, and now I'm reaping what that person has sown. Why should I suffer? Happens with kids. Maybe you've got a parent that has been irresponsible in one of those areas. And now you look back and you say, I'm reaping in my life because of the stupid things my parents did. And it may be a wake-up call for some of us that are parents, that your children are going to reap what we sow. Scary thought. But if you're the one that's on the receiving end of that, you're reaping what somebody else has sown. You're saying, it's not fair. And you're right. It isn't. It's just the way life is. Now, please hear this. This is why you and I, we need to refuse to put up with irresponsibility. Refuse it in ourselves first. That's where it has to start. Refuse to put up with irresponsibility in our own lives, in any area. But also, refuse to put up with irresponsibility in the lives of those people that we're connected to. Don't excuse that irresponsible person because she's not the only one that pays. And even though you may not be reaping yet, the reaping comes later. And one day, you may be reaping what that person has sown. And so perhaps it's time for some of us to call out that irresponsibility in someone else, because if it's not your problem now, it's going to be at some point. I know some of us are saying, oh, but Bill, I'm a Christian. You know, I thought Christians were supposed to be loving. And how could I be loving to that person if I call them out on their irresponsibility? I mean, come on, Bill, that's not loving like Jesus. Go through the New Testament and see how Jesus loved people enough to sometimes get in their face lovingly and say, that's it, knock it off. Jesus did that. Now look, I'm not saying to be mean. Don't take that away. I'm not saying to be unloving. Not at all. But sometimes the best thing that you can do with someone in your life that's being irresponsible is to go to them and say, look, you're being irresponsible. Knock it off. Knock it off. Now, often you don't say anything. Often we don't say anything to people like that. I think it's because some of us were averse to conflict, right? I mean, you give me a choice between talking with somebody about something like that and not talking, I will probably shy away because I don't especially like conflict. But it can be done in a loving way. It can be done in a way that shows love. And there are some of you that you're like, yes! Because you like confrontation. In fact, you think it's your job to confront everyone around you in your family, in your workplace, and everything else. You're just sick. If I can put it that way. And that's why people don't like you. I'm not saying do that either. That's not what this is about. I mean, get a life. Come on. This is serious stuff. But, often we don't say anything because we're afraid. Oh, I'm afraid he or she, they might leave me. They might get mad. They might think that I don't love them. Or we do it because of what I called before well-intentioned compassion. Remember I said that? Oh, well, that person is really being irresponsible. And yes, sometimes it hurts me. But you know what? Look at their home situation. Look what they grew up with. Look at the stuff that they went through. They had a tough life. You know what? God bless you for your compassionate heart. Really, I mean that. We need more Christians with compassionate hearts. But sometimes, those of us that are like that, we tend to psychoanalyze. We tend to make excuses for people that are behaving irresponsibly. We excuse it away. And a lot of times we say things like, well, I'm just going to, it's not my responsibility to do that for them. I'm just going to hope and pray. I'm going to pray. In those cases, prayer's a smoke screen. And for some of us that are in situations like this is the only thing that you're going to hear today. God says, stand up, stop your praying, and take responsibility and say something to that person in a loving and humble way. You say, Bill, that's pretty tough. Here's the thing. When you put up with irresponsibility in another person, hear this. There is no win. There is no win. There is no win. It will come back and bite them, and it will come back and probably bite you. It punishes the entire community because that's the nature of this stuff. Entire families, entire companies, entire countries. So, Joshua, getting back to him, he does what God says, and this is one of those things you can read yourself, okay? He gets up, he quits praying. I don't even think he said amen. I think, God said stand up. He just stood up. God said, no time to kneel. Don't keep hiding behind your prayers. Time to act. And he finds out what had gone on. He finds out that the culprit was Achan. They find the things. They take them. They burn them. They totally destroy those things. Achan is punished as well, as an example. And then you read the story, you'll find out. Then, a little while later, they go against this town of Ai again. This time, God was with them. This time, they had success. How do you know if you have those times when you're praying, when you actually you need to get up? How do you know? Let me give you a couple suggestions. You know it's time to stop praying and get up when what you're praying about is something that God has already addressed in His Word. If God has already addressed it in His Word, you don't need to pray about it. You don't need to pray about stuff like, well, should I obey the government? Or, should I pay my taxes? You don't have to pray about whether to pay your taxes or not. Hello? You don't have to pray about, should I be faithful in my marriage because I got this other cutie out there that's kind of vying for my attention, and man, it's a real temptation. Should I be faithful in my marriage? God, maybe you're the one that brought this person into my life. Duh. You have to pray about that. You don't have to pray, should I be an honest person? You have to pray about that. Or you know what, man, God, please tell me, is it appropriate or not to have sex before I'm married? Again, duh. God's already covered that. Stop praying about that stupid stuff. You also doing this, we're doing prayer as a smokescreen if we're trying to pray ourselves out of a situation that we've gotten ourselves into. We're trying to pray ourselves out of a situation that we behaved ourselves into. And so there's consequences. There's stuff's happening now. We're starting to reap the consequences. And we're, oh, God, please make these consequences go away. When we're praying like that, God's going to say this, get up. Take action. Quit hiding behind your prayers. Take responsibility for your life. Now, don't get me wrong, okay? I'm a pastor. I'm not telling you not to pray, okay? Prayer's a good thing. Hear me. Prayer is a good thing. But if you are substituting prayer for taking responsibility for your actions, in other words, if you're praying instead of taking responsibility for your actions, it just means that you're an irresponsible person who prays. That's all it means. You're still an irresponsible person. You just happen to be one who prays. Who cares? I don't think that impresses God. You know, let's say you're praying for, oh, God, please help us. Please help us with this financial stress that we're under. I need less financial stress. Oh, God, I know you're able. Oh, God, you're bigger. We sang about that in church. You're totally able to do that. You know what? I don't believe that God is going to answer that prayer until we get up and we start doing things like, we fix that debt. We stop abusing our credit cards. We stop living beyond our means. We stop not being generous. We've got habits that we don't fix as regarded to our spending. God is not going to answer that prayer until we stand up and do something. Or, oh, God, help me to meet the right person. I've had these people in my life. I keep meeting the wrong people, and this results in pain. Look, start going to the right places where you're going to meet the right people. Stop going to the wrong places where you're going to continue to meet those wrong people. I mean, I'm not deep, folks, but at least I'm practical. You want good grades? By all means, pray and study. My gosh, sometimes I laugh at myself. You want healthy, responsible kids, right? We all want that. Pray about it, yeah. But spend time with the kids. Engage with your kids. For some of us, stop making your work and everything else more important than time and engaging with your kids. I mean, it's a no-brainer. Or you're praying for a better job. Maybe that's a good thing to have a better job when you're praying for it. But in the meantime, in the job you got right now, start doing it with excellence instead of doing lazy and doing a shoddy job. Start doing it with excellence. Start doing it with a good attitude. Don't get into all the office politics and the stuff where there's gossip going on about this supervisor, that supervisor. Do the right thing. Thank you. Oh, I'm praying for my neighbors. Oh, Bill, my neighbor's lifestyle. Oh, I can't believe it. I'm just praying for them. And pray for your neighbors, yeah. But when are we going to do something? Those people you're praying for, why not try finding ways to serve them? Instead of going in and condemning them, why don't you find ways to serve them that shows the love of Christ? For some of us, this is just a good advertisement. We're praying for our neighbors. I wish this person would receive Christ. I wish they'd come to church, whatever. Maybe the thing to stand up and do is what you got to do is invite that person to share the magic thing, which might be just that first step for that person to come to Christ, just because you stopped praying and you stood up and did the right thing. Or, one last one. Don't just pray for a healthier marriage or dating life. I get this all the time. Oh, I want our relationship, I want our marriage to be healthier. Look it. Just stop doing the unhealthy stuff. Stop doing the unhealthy stuff that is making it like that. You can't take responsibility for the other person, but you can sure do it for yourself. Here's the thing. The reason we laugh at this is you already know what to do. We already know this. It's not rocket science. God is asking us today, stop hiding behind your prayers. Okay, we're going to end. This is how to make it real this week. I want you today to look at these questions I'm going to put up. Ask yourself these questions right now. This doesn't mean you're a good or bad person. Don't get me wrong. This doesn't make God love you any more or any less. Okay, it's not like you're doing this stuff and going to earn brownie points with God. But here's how to put this into action. First, where do I need to stand up and take responsibility? Ask that question to yourself this week. Am I using prayer as an excuse for inactivity? Be honest with yourself. Am I using prayer as an excuse for my own inactivity and my own irresponsibility? Maybe ask yourself, if others heard my prayers, are there any of my prayers that they would say, duh, I don't see you doing anything about it? I mean, is that possible? Or the next one, who should I, and these two words are key, who should I humbly and lovingly approach about the irresponsibility? Who do I need to do that? Not judging, not harsh, none of that. I got to tell you, some of the best times in my life and the growth that I have done have not just been by people criticizing me. I've gotten to the point where I've got a thin skin, but I've tried to get it thicker over the years, because when you're in a job like mine, you get criticized all the time anyway, so that, big deal. But the times in my life when I've had someone who loved me enough to come and say, and I can tell you the times that they're about if you want, that came to me and said, Bill, you're being irresponsible. Just knock it off. Those were times when God used to move me from here to that next place. It's so important if it's done out of love. And ask yourself, where am I using misguided compassion as an excuse? Where I'm just so compassionate, I'm making excuses. The person's situation was tough, but how can I speak into their lives here? And finally, as you think about what you would like to see God do in your life, what part of that is your responsibility? Because, see, I have people come to church here all the time, and then they'll leave and say, oh, I'm not leaving here because I'm not getting fed. That's I'm like, Christians say all the time, dummies. How do you really feel, Bill? Because among Christians in our culture, there's a deal where we think that it's pastor's job, it's a church job. They got to feed me, as you've heard me say, kind of like that old horror movie where they had that talking plant that I was always wanting. You can look that up on the internet. Feed me. I will do everything I can. This church will do everything we can because we are passionate about you knowing Jesus and having a passionate love relationship with him and being his followers, his disciples. But ultimately, it is your responsibility. So what is it you're wanting to see God do in your life? What part of that is your responsibility? Don't just kneel there. Do something. Do something. Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this time we've had together. Thank you for giving me such a great congregation where I can be honest and say sometimes some tough things. And thanks, Lord, that I see them listening to you all the time and taking action on what they hear you say. Thank you so much for that. And I pray that will be the case this week. I pray that you would lovingly and gently show us where we're praying about things that don't even need to be prayed about. We just need to do something. I pray you'll show us what that is if we don't know. I pray for some of those folks that are so full of compassion. I pray that they would still love the people in their circle enough to lovingly and humbly go to that person before that person's problem becomes their problem as well. And not only because of that, but just because they love that other person so much that they just can't let it go. And Father, I just pray that you would help us all to take responsibility for our lives, really. Before you open your eyes, I just want to give you a chance. I'm not going to embarrass you. You don't have to come out and see me. You don't have to write this on the connection card or anything. But I just want to ask you, is there someone that, just so I can know and pray for you, someone here would say, yeah, Bill, God spoke to me today in some way. And I've decided I'm going to go out of here and I'm going to do something. I'm going to take responsibility for my life. And I don't know what area that might be. But can I just see you raise your hands? You tell me that? Yeah, just keep them up for a second until I look around and see. God bless you. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. In fact, man, you're a great person. This is so cool. God, you see those hands, even maybe those that were a little bit afraid to do it. I ask you, give us the guts to do this, to take responsibility for our lives. Really. Amen. Thanks.